welcome back, dear friends. Another exciting day, making all sorts of exciting stuff. At the moment, let me show you. We've got subtractive manufacturing going on the laser cutter, making some of the reciprocated chronometer kits out of 10mm thick acrylic, which is lovely. And moving on, beep, 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 beep. We've got additive manufacturing going on over here on the 3D printer, again making lots and lots of parts for the reciprocating clock. And then over here, beep, 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 we've got lunacy manufacturing going on with the ukulele playing machine. Hours of fun for girl and boy. What I've done recently is to make a big heat sink, because I realised that using the little voltage regulators that come with these motor controlled boards can only handle half an amp. I had to look at the number in the end, so half an amp, and there was just too much being drawn off these, plus the fact they were actually using some of that energy to run the plucking motors, sort of. So I decided to invest in a 7805 voltage regulator, which is sitting in there, and I was thinking, use a boring old, well, standard boring, let me show you, heat sink such as that, hidden away inside. Why no, dear friends, why do that when you can make a big obvious one sitting on the outside? And I found I had a load of these brass drawer handle things, so they're brass, they conduct heat pretty well, so I ended up fixing two together with a rod of brass onto which I screwed the 7805. It's going to produce quite a lot of heat because it's turning 12 volts into 5 volts. What I've been doing is I've got it connected up, running off 12 volts, 300 milliamps to run two of the beautiful, even though I say so myself, shell lamps at 5 volts to see how warm it gets. And you can feel it's warm, but it is coping admirably. It's nice also because having two with a gap between them is going to act as a chimney and sort of draw air, cooling air through, and it does look very nice. Thank you kindly. Another top tip there. In other exciting news, we've just got back from 3 days away in Stow on Wold. It's beautiful village, I suppose you'd call it, a little town. Just to have a break. If you remember, we went away in February and the car broke down in the Lake District the day after we got there, and it was an absolute nightmare to not get it fixed in the Lake District and then to have to get it towed back to London. Oh, it's a nightmare. And then to get the parking ticket, of course, because it was only the AA were only able to leave it dropped off across the bottom of our drive. I appealed against that, and the council said, no, you've deliberately done it. You haven't provided proof, because the invoice for the garage repairs, the mechanic, didn't have a date on it, so we think you're lying. Why on earth? It shows you the petty-minded, faceless, bureaucratic numbskulls that work for the local council. Why would I deliberately park a working vehicle across the end of my drive on the yellow line, deliberately to try and get a ticket, and also put a sign in the window saying it's broken down? They are hideous people, and I think I may well write a letter. I think I've got his name, so I might write him a letter, because, another great news, I found someone through a friend who I think is retired, some sort of legal person, and I think he just stands up for people who have received these parking tickets and have a very good reason to appeal against them, but inevitably are turned down by the local council, because why bother? They're not going to lose anything if they just turn it down, no skin off their teeth, in the hope that most people just give up and pay it. And he takes these to the tribunal in London, which is the next step after the council have turned it down. And he is a really nice gentleman, and he said to me, don't worry, it's booked in on the 1st of June, you don't have to go, because I've got 2 other cases that I'm going up there for. So it's amazing. So he stands up for these people, and all he asks in return is a donation to the North London Hospice, which is really nice. And he won. I won. It was thrown out by this judge or whatever, the adjudicator, as being really unfair. So that was a really nice piece of news to have while we were away in Stow on Wold. That's lovely, because that finally put this whole car business that's been going on, dragging on since February, to rest, and the car worked. It got us there, it drove us around and brought us home. Isn't that lovely? What a lovely story, and it's so nice to be able to share something joyous with you. It's a funny little cottage or little house we were staying in, mainly because our dog Ziggy couldn't settle. Well, we've been away loads of times and stayed in cottages and things, and she might be a bit unsettled to start with until she gets to know the noises, the smells, the location, all that stuff. 3 days we were there, and she would not settle once. She was fine when she was outside going on walks and things. She really didn't like it in there, to the extent, and this is reminiscent of the film Poltergeist, to the extent where on about 2 or 3 occasions in the middle of the night we found her sitting in the middle of a room staring into another room, shaking with her tail between her legs. I mean, that really is like that scene out of Poltergeist. Different rooms, different times. She was absolutely terrified, and it wasn't until we got home after a couple of days that she actually relaxed again. That's weird. Hauntings and ghostly presences. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm going to get on with exciting things such as this, because obviously, you know, not being very good at relaxing, I had to take my laptop away with me, and I've written the function which will allow turning this potentiometer into switching signals to control all the tuning stuff. And I've even realised I didn't have enough options on this. Where is it? There it is. So I've had to add cease all, cease and desist, so that you can use this one control to control absolutely everything. Lovely. I'll stop talking. What verbal diarrhea. I'll stop talking and I'm going to get on with it. What an exciting pile of plastic. 18 acrylic 10mm thick parts and lots of... Oh, can't wait to get these reciprocating kits made. I'm still printing more bits and pieces for them. During the meanwhile, however, this is filling me with a decent amount of joy. I do like these switches. I'm so pleased, and I'm glad they didn't cover the inside with evenly with the flickering LED lamp. I love the way it glows from the bottom. And also the fact it looks beautiful with them both flickering independently. And what I'm doing now, twisting this knob round and getting the Arduino, because I've connected up the inside, to tell me for each knob setting the number, the analog input number, and I've made a note of them. So now I can go ahead and try and properly program the function I wrote while we were in the haunted cottage. The other thing that happened in the haunted cottage that I forgot to mention was I suffered succubus. The succubus and incubus, fascinating. It's when apparently, although I do start wondering about this, it's when you regain consciousness after you've been asleep, but the chemicals in your brain that your brain releases to paralyse your body so you don't go racing about, they haven't quite worn off yet. So you wake up and it really feels as though something is kneeling on you, pinning you down to the bed. And I suppose with the confusion that causes, you then imagine your brain sees some hideous creature. So with men it's succubus and with women it's incubus, two hideous sort of demon-like creatures that through the centuries have been known to do this. I've experienced it several times, funnily enough. The first time was when I was by myself in a cottage on a Welsh mountainside in a storm. That was interesting, but thankfully I'd read about it and I thought, let's take this scientifically. Let's not panic and hurtle ourselves out into the pouring rain looking for other sort of humankind panicking. Let's think about this, and it's fascinating. But that happened, as I say, the last night we were staying in this little cottage, and it really felt like someone's knee was in my back. I was lying on my front and I could not move, and I thought, sort of slowly regaining up, and I'm sure I managed to turn my head and saw this hideous creature's face that's sort of made of roots and earth sort of staring at me, all lopsided, sort of human type face. But again, that might just be my imagination. But it's interesting, the fact that the dog was staring into space, really shaking with fear. And it's like 3 or 4 days later, she's still not quite back to normal. Very, very emotional. So that's fascinating. Anyway, if that happens to you, don't panic. Just think, this is interesting. Let's study this. I'm not being pinned down by some hideous creature, or perhaps you are. who knows? I mean, if Ziggy can be aware of something that we can't see, perhaps there are other things. Anyway, there goes the laser cutter, not the microwave, the laser cutter. So it's time to put something else on to cut and to stop talking. Right, I'll speak to you soon. I'm very pleased with this. Because, you know, when you're reading an analogue in from a potentiometer or something and you want to line it up with certain points, you end up sort of doing a huge long load of if statements. If it's between this number that side and this number above, then that's the output. Next one. If it's not that, if it's below that one and above that middle section, then... And I thought, no, they're friends. I'm going to try and be clever. So it's got a little for and next, well, for loop that just goes through all the possible scenarios, calculating the middle point below the one that you're looking at and the middle point above with a 20 sort of leeway, a gap, sort of a bit like hysteresis, I suppose, to stop it flickering. And it's working beautifully. I'm absolutely thrilled. The great thing about doing it this way is that I can reuse this function with any sort of potentiometer. All I need to do is, like I said, starting off with, just go through, find these central numbers, put them into the array, Bob's your uncle, funny's your aunt, and it works beautifully. If I twist it, let's twist it, there we are, and it only shows you one if it's actually a correct one, so it ignores the zeros that you could get while moving, whilst moving indeed, between them. So if I move to, you know, if I put it right in the middle, it's just going to ignore that, or if I'm going to go right to this end, it's going to ignore that. It will only do the ones on the actual thing, and it's got this 1 second, 1000 millisecond delay, so you can move it backwards and forwards like that, but until it settles somewhere for a second, it won't do anything, it'll ignore it, which is, I'm really pleased with that. And oh, the flickering, it's getting to me. Right, now I've got the functions done and, you know, being able to control them, now I can actually write the functions, the tuning, self-tuning and things. I'll get on with it. Let's talk about the slightly embarrassing subject of serial communication. Now, I'm okay with that sort, but what I'm not okay with is electronic versions, such as what lurks inside here. There's the Arduino Mega, and just under there are, I think, about 8 lots of serial interfaces. Now, I have been puzzling about this and putting it off and thinking there's got to be a simpler way, and looking it up, spending hours poring over all sorts of forums that suggest all these problems people have with it and how complicated it is. In the end, yesterday, I'd bite the bullet, hence a new white and grey and black wire. I just thought, get on with it. What could go wrong? Well, I didn't think that, because that's not a very good way to think. So I've wired, I think I'm using serial 1 on the Mega, because serial 0 I think is used for communicating with the serial interface display on the screen, other stuff. Anyway, too complicated, leave it alone. So serial 1, transmit and receive, and ground, 0 volts, coming through to the Teensy, with them connected the other way around. So the transmit on the Teensy goes to the receive on the Arduino, and the receive on the Arduino goes to the transmit on the Teensy. Before I obviously started this, I wanted to make sure, because the Arduino works at 5 volts, ins and outs, and the Teensy works on 3.3 volts. So after many more hours of poring over hot computer screens, I discovered actually that the Teensy is tolerant of 5 volts applied to its inputs. It will cope with it, and therefore that's okay. And also the output from here, which is 3.3 volts, the Mega will also understand that. It will read that as high and 0 volts as low. It's sort of above the threshold, if you like. So I went ahead and wired it all up and just thought I'd try and send a number through, and it worked. I can't tell you how exciting that was. It's bleeding obvious, I'm sure, to the vast majority of people, but not to me. I was absolutely thrilled. I wrote a little bit of code on the Mega that if I pressed that button, it would send serial data through to the Teensy, which would then send it through to the Teensy communication on the screen. Now that's great because it sends through a byte at a time, so anything up to 255, no problem. But I was thinking, I suddenly realised, rather than trying to create very complicated ways of making sine waves so I can actually tune this with piezoelectric things or the Arduino or a DAC, is that digital? Yeah, digital to analog I2C converter, that's right. I looked at all these ways of doing it, and basically, even with a DAC, a 12-bit whatever DAC, getting a Mega to do that is just because it has to feed through the data, forming the sine wave, in real time. It's not going to have time or the energy to do very much else. So that was out, and I thought, hang on a minute! The Teensy has got all these audio capabilities on its audio board. A sine wave shouldn't be any problem. Sure enough, it isn't. I've yet to figure that out, but I've seen that it is possible. So, back to the original point. If the Teensy is built into the enclosure that holds Victoria, it can then control all the movements, her voice, her mouth, her eye movements, up and down head, blinking, left to right head, all that, which means, theoretically, I'll have a standalone automaton head that I could connect to almost any machine of my choosing, and then can, for example in this case with the ukulele machine, sing along. So that's really exciting. What would be really handy is to say, okay, I want a 330 Hertz sine wave, send through the number 330, and then it thinks, well, that's outside the range of normal commands for the automaton. It must mean, let's start a sine wave of 330 Hertz. But it only goes up to 255 for 1 byte. So, part 2, which I've just tried this morning, having taken the dog for a walk, and I've got working, which again is really obvious, but not to me, is I've learnt how to send an integer through in 2 bytes. But I thought I'd start simple, and I like this. Both parts, send and receive, really simple. If it's seesaw, which sends a 0 through, what the Teensy is actually receiving is 256, which is the frequency in Hertz. I wanted the lovely sine wave. We have got a lovely sine wave. So that's gorgeous, so that's working. It's meant to not be doing anything. That's better. That's what we want. Now I've achieved that by serial 1 print the integer rather than write. I'm sure that's completely the wrong way to do it, and it's completely inefficient, but it seems to work. So it prints that off to the Teensy, and then the Teensy, and I know that the serial event thing just runs after the loop. I thought it would call it somehow, but it hasn't got any interrupts, but it seems to work. So if something in the serial buffer, then it pass ints it, which apparently is an awful thing to do, but it seems to work. So that's nice. I'm very pleased. Right, let's see if the whole thing works now. This is most exciting. So I switch this to manual tune A. Obviously then, because it doesn't know where it's been or what it's been up to, the fret things need to find the top one. It took me a while to realise that I wasn't tuning it properly when they were sort of leaving them all over the place, but there you go, it's all a learning curve. Now I could get it to pluck, but a little bit lower, and that turns the motor. Ooh. It's so nice having a sine wave to tune to. And then of course, if I want it to stop, this is such a joy. Seesaw, and it stops. Oh, I can't tell you how exciting that is. Brilliant. I don't care if I'm using parseInt, it works. How lovely. So there's A. Can say okay, and look, it doesn't have to take the frets anywhere. And then we've got A, because they're already in the right place. Well, that's interesting. I'm just adding each function as I go along. there isn't a D string, there's a G string. Yes. Oh, how ridiculous. I don't know how I made that mistake, so I'm going to have to re-engrave this or just forget about it conveniently. So, to summarise, dear friends, I have two issues of which I know about. The first is, can someone please let me know how to use serial communication to send an integer between two Arduinos or whatever? I'd love to know the proper way, because obviously using parseInt to read some text or whatever that I've sent, that I've printed to the other controller, parseInt then has to time out after a second, and that is a delay, and it's just not right, and I like to do things properly, but I have pored over so much information on trying to find the right way, and I can't. So I'd be very grateful. Second issue, that's issue number 2, tuning the C string. Let me show you. Inevitably, overcomplicate everything. When I'm cleaning windows, it says in the instructions or music that I have to lower each by a note or something. So in fact it's not A, E, C and G, because that would be just too simple. It's G, D, A sharp and F, and those are the frequencies, the required ones. So I've managed to choose all of them except the C, which is the A sharp. I cannot do it. Let me show you. It's all very strange. So we'll set it first of all, manual tune I. It plays the thing. That's a bit flat, isn't it? So press that button a little bit. You get the idea. That's manageable. Let's do E. That's almost in tune, so that's fine. Let's forget about C. Let's go to D, which there isn't because I've got the letter wrong. That's G. That's not bad. Now this is the issue. Go to C. I cannot tune it. I just cannot. I've got quite a good ear for pitch. I have spent ages going up and down all over the place, and I cannot tune that, and therefore it sounds completely wrong. Any ideas? I'd love to know, because the other thing is the auto-tuning can't do C either. I've been poring over it for some time. It does the other three perfectly, but C it cannot do. I'll show you. Hold on a minute. Right, I've got the serial window open ready because I've littered the code, the tuning code, with serial writes, so I can try and work out what the hell's going on. Let's see what happens when we turn it to automatic tune. Right, so it's done the 3 notes and then it just gets stuck. Let's have a look at the what it's printed. So it goes through, it's got the A, it does them quickly, plus or minus 3 hertz, and it's happy. Then it goes on to do the E, then the G, then the C, and it just dies because it's meant to be cycling round and round and round. Let me show you the function. As I don't seem to be able to hold a camera steady and think at the same time, use a tripod. Here's the read frequency. It's called by the different tuning frequencies. They're all identical. They just say, okay, pluck a string, read the frequency for so long, and then if it's within this 3 hertz margin, leave it, move on to the next string. If it's bigger, turn down the motor a little bit. If it's smaller, turn up the motor a bit, and try again and keep going until it's there almost. It calls this the read frequency. I'll try and stop my finger from unfocusing it. I send it the desired frequency so that I realise that having a cut-off, so it's sort of plus or minus 100 hertz added to that, which is fine because it stops it reading back all sorts of double and triple and all sorts of harmonics. That's how it helped a great deal. It checks if the frequency measure is available, and then it reads it, and then it basically turns it into hertz and then averages it round and round and round and round. If it's outside that frequency, or if it's not a number, it then ignores that, doesn't add it to the running average, and adds a fail number to itself. So it cycles round. It can escape if it's just constantly failing, does that 200 times, jumps out returning 0. Otherwise, once it's done that 30 times, it jumps out and returns the average of the frequency, and that works perfectly now with the other 3 strings, the A, E and G. But it will not cope, like on my ears won't. They won't cope with this lower. It's the lowest note, which is actually A sharp. And I don't know why. It just will not work with it. I've littered this with serial writes to try and find out where it gets stuck. And I looked at that and it still doesn't make any sense. So if anyone has got any idea, please do let me know, as I would be eternally grateful. It's so frustrating. I'm so close to have got this ridiculous auto-tuning. I mean, I could have got on with everything else, but picking on auto-tuning is so close, and I can't tune that note anymore. I'd love to know why, or if there's a better library, because obviously this was designed to measure square waves or something like that, and all the harmonics of these strings might be a contributing factor. Anyway, thanks very much for watching if you've managed to put up with it this far. If you've liked this sort of thing, please subscribe and click the bell button. Now I need to find something else to do. I think I might make a hole tapping machine. How exciting. That's the great thing about having so many projects on the go. You know, getting all these reciprocating chronometer, all the parts for them. I need to drill and tap hundreds of holes. And every time I do this, I think, oh, there's got to be a better way than sitting there with a electric hand drill. Anyway, stop. That's the subject for another video. Thanks again for watching. See you next time, hopefully.